Hello everyone, it's me, Garrett of Oz. I'm sorry for the late video. I had actually intended to do it yesterday, but we had no power, or not power, we had no internet thanks to a whole bunch of lovely weather that has come through the DFW area lately. I got a little behind because of the Memorial Day weekend and cross-stitching stuff, but I did finish Dorothy and the Wizard and Oz. I have started Road to Oz, and I will be on track to get 2 videos this month. Alright, so, I hope everyone's had a great month since I saw you last. Alright, so, obviously this month we read Dorothy and the Wizard and Oz. I chose, because at the time this was my only reader edition, the 1939 with the weird handy-dandy spine imprint, error. And unfortunately it has what has been determined to be silverfish damage. So, eventually I would like to replace my copy. Dorothy and the Wizard and Oz, obviously it's the 4th book in the series. It was written in 1906. Excuse me, 1908. Wow, that would have been great. 1908. It's the second book... it's the first book in the 3 books that Baum was kind of forced to write by Riley and Lee. And when I say forced, it's because he contractually entered into an agreement to churn out 3 more books after Ozma of Oz. This book has some problematic moments. It's still actually, I did really enjoy it. I have some frustrations in the first chapter that we'll discuss. But it's a very odd, disjointed book. It's very episodic. It surprises me to a degree that Sinar, when they animated the series in the 80s, skipped over it, because it's really very rife for an animated series, because you have these definite, clear sections that you could split into 2 to 3 episodes as part of this bigger arc. And of course, there's one gaping plot hole that bothers just about everybody who reads them as an adult. And probably many who read them as kids, who are much more astute about things than I was in 1995 when I read it the first time. Or as astute as I should have been in 2007 when I last read it. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful. So we're rounding almost to its 110th anniversary as well. Dorothy and the Wizard and Oz begins with Dorothy and Uncle Henry arriving back from Australia in California. And they're going to visit some cousins who have a farm in California. And Uncle Henry had gone on ahead. Dorothy stays in San Francisco for a couple of days with some friends they met on the boat. Which, modern sensibility, I go, gah. But by the same token, in those days, transatlantic, or in this case, trans-Pacific sea travel, you were on that boat for probably a month. So that gives you a pretty good inkling of time, and I'm sure that Uncle Henry didn't just leave her with some randos, even though this is around the time of Albert Fish, and that does sort of make me go, ooh, this is not okay. However, by the same token, Dorothy has twice disappeared and made it back safely, so Uncle Henry probably figures, not much can really go wrong. So she arrives at the depot, and her cousin Zeb and his horse, he's a cab horse, formerly of Kentucky, are there to meet her. And she's got a cat named Eureka that she keeps in a birdcage sort of contraption, and the earthquakes are going on, because this is California, and it's earthquakes. And it's a very timely concept. I mean, given how fresh the 1906 earthquake would be in people's minds, and the fact that he was probably writing this in 1907, it was fresh, it was current. Once again, Mother Nature 3, Dorothy 0. Earthquake splits open the earth, Hank, Dorothy, Eureka, Zeb, they all fall down it, thus beginning their magical adventures underground. Unlike Alice, these aren't absurd adventures, they're downright dangerous. Literally, it seems like the first half of the book, everything wants to kill them. The first people they meet are vegetable people who want to kill them. They are miraculously sort of saved because the wizard, who had landed his balloon at a very unfortunately timed moment, because that's when the Earth opened up, and he fell down inside it too. So that reunites Dorothy and our wonderful wizard from the first book. The wizard has with him in this case 9 tiny little piglets in his pocket that he uses his sleight of hand to make people think he is a gray wizard again, which buys them some time with the vegetable people in this city of glass where there is no actual sun. It's just these glowing colored orbs that tint everything with different colors, which is kind of trippy and freaky. An early psychedelic moment. And they do escape, of course. The next thing they meet are invisible people, including invisible bears, who try to kill them. After the invisible bears, and there's not very much time really spent with the invisible bears. They only get an hour, where the vegetable kingdom get, an hour. They only get a chapter or 2. I mean, the people get a chapter, the bears get a chapter, and then we're done. The mangaboos, who are the vegetable people, get a good, 4 chapters. 4 or 5 chapters. We then briefly meet the braided man, who literally has no bearing on the plot. He gives Dorothy a box of ruffles, and the wizard a box of something else. And it's essentially, I guess, a box of sound. Never again is he mentioned. Never again do these boxes come into play. They're just there. There's a whole also storyline of Eureka wanting to eat a piglet. So next they meet some gargoyles made of wood who don't like noise, who also nearly kill them. The wizard pulls 2 guns on them too, so we've got guns in this story too. It's got everything. And Zeb is the first male who will visit Oz outside of the wizard, and he serves very little purpose other than to occasionally be brute strength. Then after they escape the gargoyles, they meet some baby dragons, known as the Dragonettes, who would eat them, but they're chained to their cave so they can't get to them. And then all of a sudden, after they've escaped them, and they've gone as far as they can go, and they can't seem to get back to the surface, even though they're as high as possible, and they're trapped, Dorothy suddenly remembers. Suddenly. And this is like a week that they've been under the ground, with very little food, apparently. Well, no, because they do at least get fed by the invisible people. So really, they've probably only been down there about 4 days. Maybe-ish. Dorothy suddenly remembers that, oh yeah, Ozma checks in on me in her magic picture every day around 4 o'clock, and if I make a signal, then she brings me to Oz. Big problem. Which everyone kind of groans at. Of course, Ozma rescues them. They all go to Emerald City. There's a big party, and they spend the last half of the book partying it up. There's a delightful, absolutely hysterically delightful trial when it's believed that Eureka has indeed eaten the pet piglet that the wizard gave to Ozma. But she definitely did not eat it, and she gets off. But it's a fairly hilarious trial sequence. Where the Tin Man tries to save her by producing a piglet and pretending it's the missing piglet, and she's like, no, that is not the piglet. And he says, well, I'm trying to save you. Well, if you would bring any real evidence, then sure. And that pretty much takes you to the end of the book. Dorothy goes back to Kansas. Zeb and Jim, and I think I may have called him Hank. Hank the mule comes up later. Jim the cab horse is only in this book. Jim and Zeb both are like, no, we're too common for this. Send us back home. And that's the end. Dorothy's back in Kansas with Eureka, and there you go. to my knowledge, I don't think Eureka ever shows back up again. It's definitely one of the shorter books. Chapter-wise, there's only, I think, 22 chapters? 20 chapters, so it's one of the shorter books. There are a couple of other things to point out. The first of which, and if anyone knows what this is, please, somebody enlighten me. But on page 198 in the first edition, or not the first edition, but I assume it's in the first edition, but in my earliest edition, there's a little asterisk on page 198 after Ozite. There is nothing that relates to this asterisk. It is not in this copy. It is not in the year earlier 1938 Sears Roebuck edition that I recently picked up. It also carries through, because I checked basically every copy I've got, it carries through the Dover and the Delray, which doesn't surprise me because the Delray is based off of the two white editions, where it's in. It's in my Canadian white edition. However, it is not in the watermill printing. You don't need to see my health insurance card. I forgot that I had used that as a bookmark. But it's not in my watermill copy. So it seems all of the Riley and Lee editions have this. I did not check any of my, ones that have, five books in one volume. I didn't check any of those. So it may be in there, too. May not be. But in terms of individually printed dot whizzes. So if anyone knows, please enlighten me. Because I would like to know. The other part of the book, which is a little problematic and a little weird, but again explains some of Baum's motivations, because we'll see a lot of the times Baum's returns to Oz coincide with his need for money and his publisher's demands. And since Riley and Lee did not hold copyright for Wizard, and would not actually print an edition of Wizard until copyright was released in 1956, they wanted the title, they wanted Wizard in the title, and they really probably wanted the Wizard to come back. Now, those of you playing along at home will remember, in the second book, in Marvelous Land, there's a big deal made out of the fact that the Wizard arrives in Oz. The Emerald City is presumed to have been built and already be existing. The king is dying. The Wizard wants power, so he takes the baby Ozma to the witch Mombi, who turns her into the boy Tip. Okay. We all remember this. Well, suddenly, he's now back in Oz, and Ozma kinda has some questions for him. But not the hard-hitting questions one might expect, like, hey dude, what the hell? Instead, she wants to know first, what is the correlation between his name, Oz, because she wants to know, let's see, old friends are reunited, I should have this right, okay, she asks him whether you called yourself Oz after this great country, or whether you believe my country is called Oz after you. It is a matter that I have long wished to inquire about, because you are of a strange race, and my own name is Ozma. And he says, well, let me explain. I was born in Omaha to a politician who named me Oscar Zoroaster, Phaedrig Isaac Norman Hinkle Emmanuel Ambrose Diggs. Diggs being the last name because he could think of no more to go before it. I've met some people with some crazy names. I still think this one's probably the craziest. And of course, he says, that's too long of a name. And so he just called himself Oz, after his first two names, the initials, because the second half of his name, the Phaedrig through the Diggs, spells pinhead. And, obviously, parents can be so cruel. And so he explains how he joined the circus, and he painted Oz on the sides of the balloon. And one day the balloon got away, and he blew him across the deserts to to the land of Oz. And People saw him, they saw the initials, they saw him do some magic tricks and thought he was a wizard. Then he gets into some real revisionist history here. At the time, continued the wizard, there were 4 separate countries in this land, each one of the 4 being ruled by a witch. But the people thought my power was greater than that of the witches, and perhaps the witches thought so too, for they never dared oppose me. I ordered the Emerald City to be built just where the 4 countries cornered together, and when it was completed, I announced myself the ruler of the land of Oz, which included all the 4 countries, the Munchkins, the Gillikins, the Winkies, and the Quadlings. Over this land I ruled in peace for many years until I grew old, and that's when Dorothy comes in. And he goes back to Omaha. And Ozma says, well, that is quite a history, but there is a little more you do not seem to understand, perhaps for the reason that no one ever told you. Many years before you came to this land was united under one ruler as it is now, and the ruler's name was always Oz, which means in our language great and good, or if the ruler happened to be a woman, her name was always Ozma. But once upon a time, 4 witches leagued together to depose the king and rule the 4 parts of the kingdom themselves. So when the ruler, my grandfather, was hunting one day, one wicked witch named Mombi stole him and carried him away, keeping him a close prisoner. Then the 4 witches divided up the kingdom and ruled the 4 parts until you came here. That was why the people were so glad to see you. They thought that you were their rightful ruler. And the wizard says, but at the time there were 2 good witches and 2 wicked witches ruling in the land. And Ozma says, well, yes, because a good witch, we'll come back to this, conquered Mombi in the north, and Glinda the Good had conquered the evil witch in the south. But Mombi was still my grandfather's jailer, and afterwards my father's jailer. When I was born, she transformed me into a boy, hoping that no one would ever recognize me and know that I was the rightful princess of the land of Oz. This is probably the biggest retcon in any literary history. The wizard has gone from being quasi-not-so-great dude to innocent bystander. All in the space of, like, 2 paragraphs. And we're not talking, like, Fatty Arbuckle level of horrible to good. Actually, we kind of are, but, I mean, it's that kind of an extreme. If you don't know Fatty Arbuckle, look it up. Crazy story. First off, where to begin? I mean, to unpack all of that, and it has to be because, again, the publishers needed the wizard back. They wanted wizard in the title because he's the big, you know, the title character of the first book that's the big seller. Interesting side note, it was intended, I think, originally to be called Little Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, because every edition I've ever seen has it that way, and yet it's not on the title. So I think it was intended, and then they decided it was already a long enough title, drop the little. But they had already printed the interior pages, and so they had to stick with that. I think that's what happened. But don't quote me, but I think. So anyhow, so now the wizard's a good guy. Very revisionist. Doesn't really even make a whole lot of sense at all. And I've discussed it with a few people, and several people, and one person suggested, I believe it was Sarah, suggested that it was probably a holdover from a stage thing, because that is very, very, very theatrical. And it's much easier to rewrite minor bits of history. The Tip to Ozma thing would be impossible to rewrite. But you could forgive, given that there were 4 years between Land of Oz and Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, and newcomers to the series probably wouldn't pick up on that. Also, Frank probably didn't altogether care. Continuity has never been a big thing in the Oz books, as you'll see the farther we get into the series. But still, biggest thing is the changing of the wizard from kind of bad guy to kind of not bad guy, actually nice guy, kind of cool, handy in a pinch, does eventually learn some real magic. So there you go. Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, like I said, it's still, I enjoyed it a lot. There are elements that bothered me. The story itself paces along very quickly. And you know, there you go. There's not a lot to say about this one. I don't believe there's a lot to say about Road either, so that one's probably going to be a short video as well. But yeah, there you go. That's Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. The big takeaways from this, especially with the Oz lore, it brings the wizard back to Oz, and that's really the big thing, is the wizard is now back in Oz and will live there permanently. There's some fun adventures. The trial sequence is hilarious. But it's definitely in terms of... And I didn't want to go along with this belief that a lot of people hold of it, but I kind of can, because I do really enjoy the book. It's not as high up on the list as it used to be, as it was in 1995. I would definitely place it above Land of Oz. Land of Oz is currently my least favorite. I'm enjoying, actually, Road to Oz very much, surprisingly. I've only read 2 chapters, but I'm enjoying it more than I ever did as a kid. Or the second time when I stopped halfway through again. Yeah, I've literally not finished that book. I've tried twice. This time I'm getting through it for y'all, because I like y'all. So, I guess that's kind of really it. But it's definitely one of the weaker books in the series that I've read so far. Not as weak, I believe, as Land of Oz, but I think a lot of Land of Oz's problem is it reads a lot like a 1900s stage musical extravaganza, which is what it was intended for. So it's kind of thin, even though it's like a 300-page book. It could have really been told in 100 pages. Yeah. So that's kind of, I think, everything for me this time. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I'm sorry for the delay in getting it posted. But I certainly appreciate it, and I will talk to you all later. Something I am considering doing, once we are moving in July, so that may cause a problem next month, we'll see. But I'm considering maybe doing some Facebook Live things with some of my collection, or maybe trying to do a little bit more one-on-one discussion on the books. So if y'all think that might be something cool, throw that at me. I don't know. We'll see. I'll talk to you all later.